Alright guys, we're back with a follow-up video to our unboxing of the ZRP Clodbuster. So we have the nicer of the two bodies that came with it mounted up here. I found these body mounts on a Shapeways store from J Concepts, and it was specifically for, it just says ZRP body mounts or something like that. And I wrote Jason Rana, and he said that they were for the ZRP Pro, which this one's not the ZRP Diablo Pro, but it's the original version. And from what I can tell, the ZRP Diablo Pro just has a provision down here in the chassis to mount the battery in there sideways, so you're not strapping it down to the bottom like this one is. But the body mounts, they seem like they're pretty good. We haven't like crash tested them or anything like that. I don't plan on trying to do that either, but they allow you to mount the body from the top in a traditional way instead of from the sides, which I've never been a big fan of mounting them through the sides, and it seems like the bodies were floppy when you do that. But it turned out really nice. It allows you to mount the body real stable and nice. Something else we did on the last video, when we took it out of the box, the back knuckles ended up right in here where the your knuckle screws are. The knuckles were broke on both sides. One of the cases was cracked, so we replaced all that stuff. And the rear lockouts that it had were actually this style here, where they almost like wedge in there in between your carrier and the knuckle, and they create a lot of they're basically pushing out the screw into the knuckle, and just from sitting, I think the stress on the plastic, it just finally gave out and broke. So I didn't want to reuse this type of lockout, so we went through ThunderTech. I contacted ThunderTech about this rear lockout, and this thing was only like 20 bucks shipped, and it's pretty awesome. It locates on each side of the rear gearbox and screws in here where your steering would have been on your knuckles, and it doesn't add any stress to anything, and it's pretty. I think it's some type of carbon fiber, even though it almost looks like fiberglass, like black fiberglass, but it looks really sharp, and it doesn't, put stress on anything, and it just locks out. It does a good job. I've driven it several times with that on there. The only issue I had with it, it's not really an issue, just here where the sway bars are, when this truck's suspension articulates or moves, the sway bars kind of slide through these eyes, and they were hitting on the bottom side. You see a little mark there. All I did was shave these down a little bit, and that problem solved. We ended up getting some Techno battery straps. We narrowed them up a little bit so they fit in the notches of the tray for the battery. We also put the RC4WD CVDs in the front, and I had the hardest time getting these to work because they were there wasn't enough space in here for the CVD. You couldn't put the knuckle in here to where your screws would just freely go in. The knuckle was spaced out so far that it wasn't going to work. Everything was in a bind, almost just like the way the rear lockouts that the truck originally had. It was just putting so much stress in this area where these screws didn't want to line up. And I had to do a bunch of modifications on the ends of the axles where they come in and meet together in the gearbox. I had to shave them down to let the CVDs go in closer, if that makes sense. I might end this video where I'm breaking the front end of the truck down and kind of show you the mods that we had to make to get that in there. And that way, if you run into that issue or you buy these CVDs, maybe it'll help you out. I don't know if the cause was like, you know, just maybe different generations of the plastic molds where these trucks have been made for so long. I'm not really sure, but I was not pleased with the way they fit. And if you notice, they're not super, there's like no play in here even now after all the mods that I did to get them to work. The wheels don't spin super free. I don't think it'll ever affect the truck because these brushless motors, they don't care. A little bit of drag like that's not going to bother. But maybe on the life of that inside bearing here, maybe that might be shortened a little bit. You can tell here like the difference, and those are still spinning on the back. So, and I've ran it a couple times since we did this mod. There's not been any issues, but when I drive this, I don't go crazy and go bashing with it too much. I basically built this truck and bought it to race indoors. And my son and I had gotten ourselves two of these monster trucks. He's got an SMT-10, and we were going to race it at the Spring Nationals in Montpelier, Ohio, and the event was canceled because of everything that's going on. But so we kind of slowed down on the builds with them a little bit, but we wanted to make a follow-up video since our other video had a lot of views. Another thing we did is this truck, in the previous video, you could, if you remember, the wheels had these red beadlock, 3D printed beadlock inserts in here, and they just seemed kind of tacky looking. I just didn't care for them too much. So to get them off there, we had to boil the wheels and tires on the stove and boiling water. And boiling water breaks down the super glue. And it breaks down the super glue on the tires. You can tell I've not glued these tires back. I might try to use shoe goo or something like that, way a little easier to remove next time. But as you can see here, it got all the super glue off, didn't mess the wheels up at all. So that turned out pretty good. The battery we end up going with for it, I believe it's a 5500 milliamp hour, 100C rating. That seemed like, and it's a 2-cell. And I turned the throttle down to like the dual rate down to like 50% on this thing. These trucks were never made for that kind of power, and for just driving around here, I don't need it to be full tilt boogie all the time. It's probably the longevity of the gears and the gear cases probably aren't that great with that kind of power all the time. But driving around here, I turned the SMT-10 down also. They're plenty fast without being 100% throttle. I think we'll cut to footage, and I'll break these gearboxes down and kind of show you the modifications we had to make these CVDs work. All right, so we have the gear case taken apart, so I could show you the modifications that I made. So initially, what was happening is right here in this area. This CVD or universal joint, whatever you want to call it, was being pushed out this way. Okay, so I couldn't get the knuckle pushed back all the way so the screw would go in, especially without being in a bind. So I'd read online people were taking and buying these more narrow bearings, which I didn't have on hand, and I don't know if that's actually a fix or not. So what I ended up doing was, when this gear case is put together, this part of the axle slides into the other half of the axle where it's hollow for this pin to go in, and I end up shaving this side of the axle down a little bit with like a belt sander, and I made it a little bit shorter, which allowed me to push the axles in together more. So by shortening that, the axle wasn't as wide from here to here, and allowed it to be pushed in more. And initially it had more gap between the back side of this universal joint, which was pushing it out on each side. And there was no bind internally, but like on the differential or anything, because there's so much slop in these from the factory anyways. I don't know how they don't break the gears all the time, but they have a ton of slop. So when I did that, I shaved that down and I put it back together, because I looked at this for a long time before I decided to cut on anything. Because these CVDs are like $50. I mean, I didn't want to ruin them right off the bat. So thought about it, and I shaved that down, I put it back together, and it was still pushed out. I couldn't understand what the deal was. So this brass piece here goes on one side of the diff gear, and it slides down over this. And so you can see it slides down, and it would stop down here based off of the back side of this. So I end up shaving this down also, and it made a little bit more slop in the differential, but it it's probably more back like it was from the factory. I think I only ground one side. I didn't touch this side. So I just ground those two things on that one side, and it allowed this axle to go back together tighter in the middle here, and that bought me just enough room to make this work. Otherwise it wasn't even going to be usable. And in addition to that, when I put it all back together, and when I went to put the wheel hexes on, these wheel hexes did have like a lip right here. So there's more material on the back side of this where it slides on. So when I went to put it together, I couldn't even get the pin in there. So I had to go on the belt sander again and grind the back side of this down to get me a little more clearance, so I could get the pin in there, so it wasn't like rubbing on this part, the back side of this rubbing against the carrier there. So I mean, these things were just not, the tolerances were way off in a lot of different areas, but it did work. It works now. It works fine. But we're talking hours of fiddling around with this stuff after you already paid $50 or whatever for a bolt-on piece that you got to spend hours trying to figure out how to make it work. So hopefully that helps you guys out. It worked for me. So if you guys have any questions, you can comment below. We should have some more stuff coming up. Maybe we'll do some running videos, my son and I running his monster truck. We'll take him outside and bash or something. All right, thank you.